Before we begin, I'd like to thank you all for supporting the beginnings of this channel and to encourage you to try check out my other videos. If you have any thoughts about what you'd like to see covered, let me know in the comments. Of McCarthy's early fictions, The Orchid Keeper, Child of God, Outer Dark remains the most obscure, and in this sense the most haunting. The novel follows the incestuous siblings Culla and Rinthy home, the birth and abandonment of their child, and the home's respective journeys in search of the boy and their abdication of paternal responsibility. Told in alternating chapters, the siblings' separate journeys are punctuated by short vignettes that detail the deeds of three nightmarish men who follow in Culla's wake, murdering several of his brief acquaintances. The novel, however, cannot be explained in terms of its plot, or by interrogating the many deaths that take up its pages. What matters is that Culla's path home dissolves into blood, and with it the possibility of return. The trajectory of Culla's journey is given shape by a dream at the novel's outset. In it, Culla finds himself in a square among a beggared multitude, composed of lepers, the disabled, and the blind. All listen intently to the admonitions of a prophet who announces a coming solar eclipse and promises that all these souls will be cured of their afflictions. To this, Culla cries out, asking whether he too can be cured. The prophet answers in a tentative, twice-qualified affirmative. Yes, I think perhaps you will be cured. The sun is eclipsed as foretold, and yet the sun does not return. The world is soon frozen in darkness. Breath issues from their chattering mouths, and the crowd grows increasingly restless until it turns against the dreamer Culla and sets upon him with howls of outrage. As has been widely recognized, Culla's nightmare is instrumental in defining both the grotesque, darkly gothic aesthetics of the novel, as well as the dreamlike feel and flow of the narrative. Equally, it also announces a repressed and urgent desire for something like salvation, that at the same time as it attests to Culla's profound sense of guilt, is also foreclosed by his concomitant sense of the magnitude of his sin. While the novel can be understood as about man's existential homelessness, within an indifferent cosmos that denies the grids of understanding we habitually oppose upon it. The novel can also be understood to concern Culla's inability to transcend his innate moral sensibility, his sense, in other words, that he cannot be forgiven. In this light, the novel's interest in Culla's desire for salvation is not merely concerned with the pathology of his guilt-ridden psyche, nor the theological dimensions of his transgression, but rather the philosophical ground upon which self-forgiveness or absolution is possible within a cosmos that is indifferent to human suffering, and that is characterized by isolation, disconnection, and displacement. Culla's crisis in this sense is not timeless or universal, but more narrowly is an expression of postmodernity, of this age in which a penitent, like Culla, without the traditional support of religion and its resources of faith and grace, cannot escape the dark night of the soul, and is thus condemned to doubt. The story itself, of accusations and persecution, is unsurprising in this light, and abounds with examples of victims who are innocently drawn into the circle of accusation and punishment. Culla is no exception to this, and its trajectory is circular in a way of a downward spiral, the teleology of which ends, as Markus Wierschem puts it, in annihilation. What in the end assures readers of Culla's death is not the unholy trio of men who, following Culla's wake, force him to partake of human flesh, and in a later episode sacrifice and consume his abandoned infant son, but rather his inability to act, to judge and to decide what to do on the grounds of his will alone. The importance of this is made clear years later, at the end of the novel, as the road brings him to a swamp. Turning back, Color sees a blind man following the path, and recognizing his ignorance to what lies ahead, thinks, someone should tell a blind man before setting him out that way. Color's inability to recognize that he is precisely the kind of person he thinks should act is as remarkable for its lack of self-awareness as it is telling of who Color is. That is, someone who is incapable of ethical action, someone who, as Slavoj Žižek might suggest, is firmly of our postmodern time.